reading from the Gospel of Luke. While they were there, the time came for her to have her child, and she gave birth to her firstborn son. She wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them at the inn. The word of our God. In reflecting on this much-beloved Christmas story, two things stand out for me. The first is the reality that the pregnant Mary and her husband Joseph had very little power or control over their own circumstances. What expectant parents would ever travel to a distant village away from family and friends when their firstborn child was due at any moment? Only a family that had no choice but to comply with the demands of an oppressive, occupying government and a complicit religious leadership, both demanding exorbitant civil and temple taxes despite the subsistence level standard of living for most people in Palestine. And then there's the matter of accommodations. No Holiday Inn here. No welcoming concierge, no room service, only a shelter for animals, only socially unacceptable shepherds, socially unacceptable because they smelled like the sheep they tended. The picture Luke paints is that of a low-income family on the margins of society, desperately seeking shelter so that Mary could labor and give birth, protected somehow from the elements. I can't help but wonder how many refugee families from Syria, Iraq, Nigeria, or Yemen find themselves in similarly desperate circumstances this very night. The second thing that stands out for me is how easily the Lucan author glides over the messy realities of labor and birth. We hear a lot about the politics requiring Jesus to register in his hometown, about the shepherds keeping watch, and about heavenly hosts of angels celebrating. Sort of all the good stuff. Of the actual birth, we learn only the basics. It was time. The baby was born. We wrapped the baby in blankets. And that's pretty much it, folks. If ever you wondered about who wrote Luke's gospel, I think we can be pretty sure of one thing at least. God love him, this gospel has to have been written by a man. So, tonight, since I'm the one who gets to reflect on this story, I want to fill in the picture and include some things a woman might remember if she was the one telling the story about a birth that changed the course of history. As a nurse midwife myself, I've always been a little upset that no one ever includes the midwife in our nativity scenes. We always find Mary, Joseph, baby Jesus, shepherds, angels, and royal wisdom figures. We find donkeys, cows, sheep, sometimes Santa Claus, and every so often a little drummer boy. But do we ever find a midwife? No. Well, why not? No one seriously thinks that Joseph, as devoted as he was, actually delivered this baby, do we? In first century Palestine, it really would have been completely inconceivable for a woman to give birth without the care and comfort of other women, and in particular, the care of women the French call sages-femmes, wise women, the French word for midwives, which I just love. Even though Mary and Joseph were far from home, hospitality was pretty much the prime directive for the peoples of Palestine, who were not so far removed from their own desert wandering days. So I'm guessing the innkeeper, or more probably his wife, saw Mary's plight and sent for the wise women of Bethlehem to come and tend to her. As a first-time mom, there were no guarantees that Mary would emerge from her ordeal alive. Scholars estimate that maternal mortality rates were as high as 35% in the first century. Everyone would have known cousins, wives, sisters, aunties, and neighbors who had died in childbirth. And while Mary and Joseph may have been more optimistic than most, given the biblical accounts of the reassuring mystical experiences surrounding Mary's pregnancy, this would still have been a very scary time for both of them. As a midwife telling this story, I'd surmise that Mary's labor probably began en route to Bethlehem. For first pregnancies, pre-labor with their irregular contractions can easily last several days, with the regular contractions of latent labor lasting as long as 22 hours, and some of you know this. Christmas cards aside, we don't really know that Mary was riding a donkey. In fact, walking would have helped her labor progress. In Luke's story, Mary was probably well into her labor before finally finding shelter. When active labor arrived at last, surely the midwives had also arrived to help Mary manage her rapid, excruciatingly painful contractions and to show Joseph just how to support her as she began the arduous effort of pushing the newborn Jesus into a waiting world and, more immediately, into the midwife's waiting arms. We won't dwell on Mary's anguished cries, her sweat, her blood, or her tears, but I can tell you that when that baby Jesus appeared at last, there was no need for chanting angels, because the joy and wonder reflected in Mary and Joseph's faces shone more brightly than any guiding star ever could. From a midwife's point of view, all that heavenly host stuff is afterglow. The long-awaited child is born. Mary is safe, and Joseph, as proud and relieved as any new dad, trying not to faint over the intensity of watching his Wonder Woman wife give birth. Mary had labored long and well to birth a child who would be all about God's love everlasting. When he was old enough, she would teach him the tenets of Judaism, summed up in her Magnificat hymn about a God who fills the hungry with good things and raises up the lowly. Her boy child would become a man of peace who died a violent death, even as he labored mightily himself to bring forth her Magnificat God's justice reign in the face of hatred. My midwife's question for each of us tonight is to ask, in what way are we laboring, like Mary, to birth God's abiding love into a world so much in need of it, especially now? In what way are we, like Joseph, supporting the efforts of all who labor on behalf of the marginalized, whether refugees, immigrants, the homeless, or victims of sex trafficking? In what way are we, like the midwives, supporting our powerful birthing God who longs for right relationship and protection and cherishing of a Mother Earth that in fact gave birth to us all? To conclude, I share a prayer poem that pretty much sums up my own midwife's understanding of the mystery, the challenge, and the hope of this most transcendent of nights. Comfort, be comforted, my people, for God's glad ecstasy is new made flesh by human yes. Through earth's long mourning, God waits again, near at hand, to birth the earth afresh in celestial, millennial unfolding of Christ's transforming yes. Yet, all depends on still small voice. Be it done in me as you would have it be. Then God's glad life now gifts, uplifts, heals, enfolds newborn Christmas soul in swaddling delight. Come, beloved Jesus, herald now God's just and kindly reign. Teach us how we learn to live inside our God again. Amen. And Merry Christmas.